In the marble halls of Valdoria Palace, where whispers carry more weight than proclamations and secrets lurk behind every gilded door, one conversation would shatter centuries of royal tradition. What began as a routine security briefing would expose a truth so devastating that it would force Princess Isabella to make a choice that could either save her family's legacy or destroy it forever. Sometimes the greatest threats to a kingdom come not from foreign enemies, but from the very bloodline meant to protect it. Princess Isabella Margaret of Valdoria stood at the towering windows of the East Wing, watching the morning mist roll across the palace gardens like ghostly fingers reaching toward the ancient oak trees her great-grandmother had planted decades ago. At 42, she had inherited not just her mother's sharp intellect and unwavering sense of duty, but also the burden of being the crown's most trusted protector of family secrets. Her reputation as the Iron Princess had been earned through years of handling delicate situations with surgical precision, never allowing emotion to cloud her judgment. The palace corridors buzzed with their usual morning activity as servants moved silently through their well-rehearsed routines, but Isabella sensed something different in the air today. Captain Marcus Thornfield, head of the Royal Protection Unit, had requested an urgent private meeting, and in her 20 years of working with various security chiefs, she had learned to read the subtle signs of genuine concern versus routine protocol updates. Captain Thornfield arrived precisely at 9 o'clock, his usually immaculate uniform bearing small signs of a sleepless night. His weathered face, marked by years of military service before joining the royal security detail, carried an expression Isabella had never seen before, a mixture of professional duty warring with personal anguish. He carried with him a slim leather portfolio that seemed to weigh more than its physical content suggested. "Your Royal Highness," he began, his voice carrying the formal tone required by protocol. Yet underneath, Isabella detected something that made her spine straighten instinctively. "I must speak with you about Prince Leopold. What I'm about to share will require your complete discretion, and I fear it will challenge everything we thought we knew about recent events." Prince Leopold, Isabella's 12-year-old nephew and third in line to the throne, had always been considered the family's brightest light. His quick wit, genuine kindness to staff members, and natural charisma had made him beloved not just within the palace walls, but among the public who saw him during official appearances. Unlike many royal children who seemed overwhelmed by their position, Leopold appeared to thrive in his role, showing an intuitive understanding of his responsibilities that impressed even the most seasoned courtiers. Captain Thornfield opened his portfolio with deliberate care, revealing a collection of photographs, audio transcription sheets, and what appeared to be surveillance reports. 3 weeks ago, our routine security protocols detected unusual activity in Prince Leopold's private quarters during the early morning hours. Initially, we assumed it was simply a young boy having difficulty sleeping, perhaps dealing with the pressures of his upcoming confirmation ceremony. Isabella moved closer to examine the documents, her trained eye immediately recognizing the serious nature of whatever Thornfield was about to reveal. The photographs showed thermal imaging of movement patterns, timestamps indicating activity between 2 and 4 in the morning on multiple occasions, and detailed logs of electronic communications that should not have been possible from a 12-year-old secure devices. What we discovered, Your Highness, defies everything we understand about Prince Leopold's character and capabilities. Thornfield continued, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper despite the privacy of Isabella's chambers. The prince has been conducting unauthorized communications with individuals outside the palace security perimeter. More concerning still, these communications appear to involve sensitive information about family schedules, security protocols, and private family matters that should never leave these walls. The weight of Thornfield's words settled over Isabella like a heavy cloak. In her years of protecting the royal family's interests, she had dealt with external threats, media intrusions, and political challenges, but never had she faced the possibility of a security breach originating from within the family itself, especially from someone so young and seemingly innocent. "Show me everything," Isabella commanded, her voice taking on the authoritative tone that had earned her respect throughout the kingdom's power structures. As Thornfield spread the evidence across her mahogany desk, Isabella felt the familiar sensation of her mind shifting into crisis management mode, even as her heart struggled to process the implications of what she was seeing. The transcriptions revealed conversations that demonstrated a level of sophistication far beyond Leopold's apparent years. He discussed complex political situations with an understanding that suggested access to classified briefings, referenced private family disputes that were known only to immediate family members, and, most disturbing of all, seemed to be coordinating his information sharing with a precision that suggested careful planning rather than innocent childish mistakes. "Captain, I need you to understand the gravity of what you're suggesting," Isabella said, her eyes never leaving the documents before her. "You're telling me that Prince Leopold, a 12-year-old boy who has never shown anything but loyalty and love for this family, is somehow involved in activities that could compromise the security of the entire royal household." Thornfield nodded grimly, pulling out additional documentation that included financial records showing unexplained deposits into accounts that technically belonged to Leopold's educational trust fund, but were being accessed in ways that violated every established protocol for royal children's finances. "Your Highness, I've served this family for 15 years, and I would never bring such concerns to you without absolute certainty. What we're looking at suggests either Prince Leopold has developed capabilities and motivations that no one in the family suspects, or what, Captain?" Isabella's voice carried a warning tone that made it clear she expected complete honesty, regardless of how difficult the truth might be to accept. "Or someone has been using Prince Leopold as an unwitting conduit for information, possibly through manipulation or coercion that we haven't yet detected. Either scenario presents unprecedented challenges for family security and protocol." Isabella walked to her private safe, retrieving her own confidential files on family security matters. Cross-referencing Thornfield's evidence with her own records, she began to see patterns that had previously seemed unrelated. Minor breaches in information security that had been attributed to various sources, scheduled changes that had somehow become known to unauthorized individuals, and family tensions that had appeared in media reports with suspicious accuracy. "Captain Thornfield, I want you to understand that what happens next will determine not just Prince Leopold's future, but potentially the stability of our entire royal line," Isabella said, her voice carrying the weight of centuries of royal responsibility. "Protocol demands that I report this immediately to their majesties, but doing so will set in motion a series of consequences that cannot be undone." The silence that followed was broken only by the distant chiming of the palace clock tower, marking the passage of time that seemed both frozen and accelerating simultaneously. Isabella knew that within hours, she would need to make decisions that would affect not just her nephew's life, but the very foundations of trust upon which the royal family's public and private relationships were built. "I need you to maintain absolute secrecy about this conversation and these findings until I determine our next course of action," Isabella instructed, her mind already beginning to formulate the complex considerations that would guide her decision-making process. "Continue your monitoring, but expand it to include anyone who has had regular access to Prince Leopold over the past 6 months. I want to know every conversation, every interaction, and every possible avenue through which the situation could have developed." As Captain Thornfield gathered his materials and prepared to leave, Isabella remained at her window, staring out at the palace grounds where Leopold could often be seen playing with the gardener's children or reading under his favorite tree. The boy she had watched grow from an infant into a promising young royal now represented either a threat to everything she had spent her life protecting, or a victim of circumstances beyond his understanding and control. The morning mist had cleared, revealing the sharp clarity of a day that would mark the beginning of the most challenging crisis Isabella had ever faced. In the distance, she could see Leopold's tutor arriving for his daily lessons, unaware that the young prince's education was about to take a dramatically different direction than anyone could have anticipated. The next 48 hours passed in a carefully orchestrated dance of normalcy that required every ounce of Isabella's considerable diplomatic skills. She attended the weekly family breakfast, participated in her scheduled charity event, and maintained her regular evening walks through the palace gardens, all while her mind processed the devastating implications of Captain Thornfield's revelations and formulated a strategy that could address the crisis without destroying her nephew in the process. During the family breakfast, Isabella watched Leopold with new eyes, searching for any sign that might explain the intelligence reports now locked in her private safe. The boy appeared exactly as he always had, bright, engaged, occasionally mischievous in the way that 12-year-olds should be, and genuinely affectionate toward his family members. He teased his younger sister about her upcoming piano recital, listened respectfully to his grandmother's stories about her charitable foundation work, and showed the kind of natural curiosity about current events that had always impressed the adults around him. Yet beneath this familiar surface, Isabella now detected subtle inconsistencies that might have been invisible without Thornfield's evidence to guide her observations. Leopold's questions about family schedules seemed slightly more detailed than casual interest would warrant. His knowledge of political situations appeared to extend beyond what his tutors would typically cover. And, most troubling of all, he demonstrated an awareness of tensions between various family members that should have been completely shielded from someone his age. Queen Helena, Leopold's grandmother, and the family's matriarch had always maintained that children absorbed more information than adults realized, and she encouraged the family to speak openly around the younger generation rather than creating an atmosphere of artificial secrecy. This philosophy had shaped Leopold's upbringing, giving him access to conversations and insights that most royal children would never experience. Isabella now wondered whether this openness had created vulnerabilities that someone had learned to exploit. After breakfast, Isabella retreated to her private study to review additional materials that Captain Thornfield had delivered through secure channels during the night. The new evidence painted an even more complex picture of Leopold's activities, including detailed logs of his computer usage that revealed sophisticated understanding of digital security measures that no 12-year-old should possess without specialized training. The financial records were particularly disturbing, showing a pattern of transactions that suggested Leopold's educational trust fund was being used to facilitate payments to individuals whose identities were carefully concealed through multiple layers of financial instruments. The amounts were significant enough to indicate serious criminal activity, yet small enough relative to the total fund size that they might have gone unnoticed indefinitely without Thornfield's thorough investigation. Isabella's phone buzzed with a message from her private secretary, informing her that King Frederick had requested a meeting that afternoon to discuss family security matters of urgent importance. Her heart rate increased as she realized that somehow, despite their efforts at discretion, word of the investigation had reached the highest levels of the royal hierarchy far sooner than she had anticipated. The meeting with her father took place in the king's private office, a room that had witnessed the most sensitive conversations in the kingdom's recent history. King Frederick, at 68, remained a formidable presence whose sharp intellect had guided the monarchy through numerous challenges. But Isabella could see the strain of recent months reflected in the deeper lines around his eyes and the subtle tremor in his hands that appeared when he was under significant stress. "Isabella, I've received some disturbing reports about Leopold that require immediate attention." The king began without preamble, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority that had defined his 40-year reign. "Captain Thornfield briefed me this morning about activities that could potentially compromise the security and reputation of our entire family. I need to know your assessment of the situation and your recommendations for how we should proceed." Isabella had prepared for this moment, but facing her father's direct inquiry still required careful navigation of competing loyalties and responsibilities. "Your Majesty, the evidence suggests that Leopold is either involved in activities far beyond his apparent understanding, or someone has manipulated him into providing information and access that could seriously damage our family's interests. Either scenario requires delicate handling to protect both Leopold and the broader royal institution. King Frederick studied the documents that Isabella presented, his expression growing increasingly grave as he absorbed the full scope of the potential security breach. The silence stretched between them as he processed implications that extended far beyond a family crisis into matters of national security and international diplomatic relations. Isabella, you understand that if this information were to become public, it would not only destroy Leopold's future, but could potentially destabilize the monarchy itself. The king said finally, his voice heavy with the burden of decisions that would affect generations of their family. The public's trust in our institution depends on their belief that we are worthy guardians of the responsibilities they have entrusted to us. Evidence that a member of our family, regardless of his age, has been involved in activities that compromise that trust could have consequences that extend far beyond our personal concerns. The weight of her father's words settled over Isabella as she considered the broader implications of their situation. The monarchy's survival in the modern world depended on maintaining a careful balance between tradition and transparency, between privacy and public accountability. Any scandal involving Leopold would inevitably raise questions about the family's fitness to continue their constitutional role, potentially triggering political crises that could reshape the entire governmental structure. Father, I believe our first priority must be determining whether Leopold is acting voluntarily or whether he has been manipulated by outside forces, Isabella said, choosing her words with the precision that had made her the family's most trusted diplomatic representative. If he is being manipulated, then he is as much a victim as the family itself, and our response must reflect that reality. If he is acting voluntarily, then we face a different set of challenges that will require different solutions. King Frederick walked to the window overlooking the palace courtyard, where Leopold could be seen engaged in his afternoon riding lesson, his natural grace and confidence evident even from a distance. That boy has been the light of this family since the day he was born, the king said quietly, his voice carrying a mixture of love and anguish that reminded Isabella of the personal costs of their public responsibilities. The thought that he could be involved in anything that threatens what we have spent our lives building is almost impossible to accept. Your Majesty, I request permission to conduct a more thorough investigation before we make any irreversible decisions, Isabella said, her mind already formulating a plan that could provide answers while protecting Leopold from unnecessary exposure. I want to interview his tutors, his personal staff, and anyone else who has had regular access to him over the past 6 months. I also want to examine his personal relationships outside the palace to determine if someone has gained his trust in ways that compromise his judgment. The king turned back to face his daughter, his expression reflecting the terrible burden of leadership that required him to balance personal love against institutional responsibility. You have my permission to proceed, but, Isabella, I need you to understand that we may face decisions in the coming days that will test everything we believe about family loyalty and public duty. If Leopold has been compromised, we must determine whether he can be protected and rehabilitated or whether more drastic measures will be necessary to preserve the monarchy itself. As Isabella left her father's office, she carried with her not just the authority to investigate her nephew's activities, but also the terrible knowledge that the outcome of her investigation could determine whether Leopold's future lay in redemption and healing or in exile and disgrace. The palace corridors that had always represented security and tradition now seemed filled with shadows and uncertainties that threatened to reshape everything she had believed about her family and their place in the world. That evening, Isabella stood once again at her window, watching Leopold play in the gardens with the unconscious joy of childhood, unaware that his every move was now being scrutinized for signs of deception or manipulation. The investigation that would determine his fate was already in motion, and Isabella knew that within days, the truth would emerge in ways that would forever change the relationship between Leopold and the family that had shaped his entire existence. Isabella's investigation began at dawn the following Monday with a systematic examination of everyone in Leopold's inner circle, starting with Margaret Whitmore, his primary tutor for the past 3 years. Mrs. Whitmore, a distinguished former Cambridge professor who had educated several generations of European nobility, arrived at Isabella's private office with the careful composure of someone accustomed to discretion, but clearly concerned about the unusual nature of the summons. "Mrs. Whitmore, I need you to think carefully about any changes you've observed in Prince Leopold's behavior, interests, or capabilities over the past 6 months," Isabella began, her tone professionally neutral, while her eyes searched for any sign of recognition or anxiety that might indicate the tutor's awareness of the investigation's true purpose. "I'm particularly interested in his intellectual development, his curiosity about topics beyond his curriculum, and any indication that he might be receiving information or instruction from sources outside his official education program." Mrs. Whitmore's response revealed layers of complexity that Isabella hadn't anticipated. "Your Royal Highness, I must confess that Prince Leopold's intellectual growth over the past months has been remarkable, even extraordinary. His grasp of political theory, international relations, and economic principles has advanced far beyond what I would expect from someone his age, even considering his exceptional natural intelligence and privileged access to information." Isabella leaned forward, sensing that Mrs. Whitmore's observations might provide crucial insights into the mystery surrounding Leopold's activities. "Can you give me specific examples of this advanced understanding?" "Certainly, Your Highness. Last month, during our discussion of European Union trade policies, Leopold demonstrated knowledge of specific negotiation strategies and diplomatic considerations that aren't covered in any of his textbooks. He spoke about currency fluctuations, agricultural subsidies, and political pressures in individual member states with a sophistication that suggested access to current, detailed analysis rather than historical overviews." Mrs. Whitmore paused, her expression reflecting the concern of an educator who had recognized something unusual, but hadn't known how to address it appropriately. More troubling, perhaps, was his knowledge of internal family discussions about the kingdom's position on various international issues. He referenced conversations and decisions that, to my knowledge, should not have been accessible to someone his age, regardless of his position in the family hierarchy. Isabella's pulse quickened as Mrs. Whitmore's observations confirmed her worst fears about the scope of Leopold's unauthorized access to sensitive information. "Did you ever ask Leopold directly about the sources of his knowledge?" "I did, Your Highness, and his responses were always vague, but confident. He would say things like, 'I heard someone discussing it,' or 'I read something about it,' but when I pressed for specifics, he would deflect with charm and humor in ways that seemed calculated rather than naturally childish. It was as if he had been coached on how to avoid revealing his actual sources while maintaining credibility." The interview with Mrs. Whitmore continued for nearly 2 hours, revealing a pattern of increasingly sophisticated behavior that suggested Leopold was either receiving advanced education from undisclosed sources or had developed methods of accessing information that far exceeded his apparent capabilities. Mrs. Whitmore's professional assessment was that Leopold's intellectual development over the past 6 months represented an acceleration that was virtually impossible through normal educational processes alone. Isabella's next interview was with James Patterson, Leopold's personal protection officer, whose observations provided a different but equally disturbing perspective on the young prince's recent activities. Patterson, a former Special Forces officer whose loyalty to the royal family was unquestionable, described changes in Leopold's daily routines that had raised concerns but hadn't been formally reported due to their apparently innocent nature. "Your Royal Highness, Prince Leopold has begun requesting privacy for activities that previously were completely open," Patterson explained, his professional demeanor unable to entirely conceal his personal fondness for the boy he was assigned to protect. 6 months ago, Leopold was content to have security present during all his activities, but recently he has specifically requested time alone for reading, computer work, and what he describes as thinking about important things. Patterson's detailed logs revealed that Leopold had developed sophisticated strategies for creating periods of unsupervised time, often by requesting bathroom breaks, claiming minor illnesses that required rest, or engaging in activities and locations where continuous direct observation would be impractical. While none of these behaviors violated security protocols individually, their patterns suggested deliberate planning to avoid oversight. More significantly, Your Highness, Prince Leopold has demonstrated knowledge of our security procedures that goes well beyond what any family member should know, Patterson continued, his voice reflecting the professional concern of someone who recognized serious operational security implications. He knows our shift schedules, our communication protocols, and our response procedures in ways that suggest either extensive observation or access to classified security briefings. Isabella realized that Leopold's knowledge of security procedures could explain how he had managed to conduct unauthorized communications without detection for so long. If he understood the limitations and blind spots in the protection protocols, he could have deliberately exploited those vulnerabilities to create opportunities for activities that would normally be impossible under royal security constraints. The third interview with Dr. Sarah Chun, the child psychologist who had been providing periodic assessments of Leopold's emotional development as part of standard royal family protocols, revealed perhaps the most disturbing aspects of the situation. Dr. Chin's professional evaluation suggested that Leopold's personality had undergone subtle but significant changes that could indicate either natural maturation accelerated by extraordinary circumstances or psychological manipulation by skilled individuals. Your Royal Highness, Leopold's emotional profile has shifted in ways that concern me professionally, Dr. Chin explained, referring to detailed psychological assessments that tracked various aspects of his development over time. 6 months ago, he demonstrated the typical emotional responses of a bright, well-adjusted 12-year-old. His current profile suggests emotional sophistication and psychological resilience that would be unusual even in much older adolescents. Dr. Chin's analysis indicated that Leopold had developed advanced skills in emotional regulation, social manipulation, and strategic thinking that were inconsistent with normal child development, even for someone with his exceptional intelligence and privileged upbringing. These capabilities could represent either remarkable natural growth or the result of intensive psychological conditioning by individuals with expertise in human behavior modification. Most troubling, Your Highness, is Leopold's demonstrated ability to compartmentalize information and emotions in ways that suggest training in deception and operational security, DR. Chun continued, her professional objectivity unable to entirely mask her personal concern for Leopold's well-being. These are capabilities that intelligence professionals develop through years of specialized training, not skills that children acquire naturally regardless of their circumstances. As Isabella concluded her interviews with Leopold's inner circle, she faced the disturbing realization that her nephew had somehow acquired capabilities and access that represented either an extraordinary natural development or systematic preparation for activities that threatened the security of the entire royal family. The evidence suggested that Leopold was not merely an innocent victim of manipulation, but possibly an active participant in sophisticated operations that required explanation and immediate intervention. That evening, Isabella met again with Captain Thornfield to review the complete picture that had emerged from her investigation. The evidence now pointed to a situation far more complex and dangerous than either of them had initially realized, with implications that extended beyond family security into matters of national intelligence and international relations. Captain, based on what we've learned, I believe we're dealing with a situation that requires expertise beyond our normal security capabilities, Isabella said, her voice reflecting the weight of decisions that would determine not just Leopold's future, but potentially the survival of the monarchy itself. We need to determine whether Leopold has been recruited by foreign intelligence services, domestic political enemies, or criminal organizations, and we need to make that determination quickly before the situation deteriorates further. The investigation had revealed that protocol would indeed be shattered, not just by Leopold's activities, but by the response that those activities would require from a royal family whose survival depended on maintaining public trust while protecting themselves from threats they had never imagined could emerge from within their own bloodline. The secure conference room in the palace's underground security facility had never hosted a meeting quite like the one convened at 6 o'clock the following Wednesday morning. Isabella sat across from a carefully selected team that included Captain Thornfield, Director Sarah Mitchell from the National Intelligence Service, Dr. Elizabeth Harper, a specialist in adolescent psychology and behavioral analysis, and Colonel David Reynolds, a counterintelligence expert whose reputation for handling sensitive operations with absolute discretion had made him the government's most trusted consultant on matters affecting national security. Director Mitchell, a sharp-eyed woman in her early 50s whose 25-year career in intelligence had prepared her for complex cases, but never one involving a 12-year-old member of the royal family, spread classified documents across the conference table with methodical precision. The Intelligence Service's independent investigation, conducted parallel to Isabella's family-focused inquiry, had revealed connections and implications that transformed Leopold's activities from a family crisis into a matter of international significance. Your Royal Highness, our analysis indicates that Prince Leopold has been in communication with a network of individuals whose identities and objectives represent serious threats to both family security and national interests, Director Mitchell began, her professional tone unable to entirely conceal the gravity of the situation they were confronting. The sophistication of these communications and the value of the information being exchanged suggest operational planning that extends far beyond anything we would associate with a child's activities, even a child with Leopold's exceptional access and intelligence. The documents revealed that Leopold's communications network included individuals connected to foreign intelligence services, domestic political opposition groups, and international criminal organizations whose interests in royal family information could serve purposes ranging from political destabilization to financial manipulation to personal blackmail. The scope of these connections indicated that Leopold's recruitment and development had been planned and executed with professional expertise over an extended period. Colonel Reynolds, whose weathered face reflected decades of experience with the darkest aspects of international espionage, provided analysis that challenged every assumption Isabella had held about her nephew's involvement in the situation. Your Royal Highness, the evidence suggests that Prince Leopold has been systematically developed as an intelligence asset through methods that combine psychological manipulation with genuine educational advancement. His handlers have been careful to enhance his natural capabilities while gradually introducing him to activities that serve their operational objectives. The revelation that Leopold had been developed as an intelligence asset rather than simply manipulated or coerced forced Isabella to reconsider everything she thought she understood about the situation. If Leopold had been recruited and trained by professional intelligence operatives, his activities represented not just betrayal of family trust, but active participation in operations designed to compromise the security and stability of the monarchy itself. Dr. Harper's psychological analysis provided insights into how such recruitment might have been accomplished without triggering obvious warning signs from Leopold's family, teachers, or security detail. Your Royal Highness, children with exceptional intelligence and privileged access are particularly vulnerable to sophisticated recruitment techniques that appeal to their desire for recognition, challenge, and adult approval. Leopold's natural curiosity and advanced intellectual capabilities would have made him an ideal target for operatives skilled in adolescent psychology and behavioral modification. The psychological profile suggested that Leopold's recruitment had begun with seemingly innocent interactions that gradually introduced him to concepts, activities, and relationships that normalized his participation in increasingly sensitive operations. His handlers had been careful to ensure that his cooperation appeared voluntary and was reinforced through intellectual stimulation, emotional validation, and gradual increases in responsibility and access that appealed to his developing sense of identity and importance. The most disturbing aspect of this situation, Dr. Harper continued, is that Leopold's psychological conditioning has been sophisticated enough that he may genuinely believe he is serving legitimate purposes rather than betraying his family and country. His handlers have likely convinced him that his activities serve higher principles or address injustices that his family doesn't understand or acknowledge. Isabella struggled to process the implications of Dr. Harper's analysis, which suggested that Leopold's betrayal might stem not from malicious intent, but from sophisticated psychological manipulation that had corrupted his understanding of loyalty, truth, and responsibility. If Leopold genuinely believed he was serving legitimate purposes, his rehabilitation would require not just cessation of his current activities, but fundamental psychological reconstruction of his beliefs and relationships. Director Mitchell presented additional evidence that revealed the scope of potential damage from Leopold's activities over the past months. Intelligence assessments indicated that information provided through Leopold's network had already influenced international negotiations, affected financial markets, and compromised diplomatic relationships in ways that would have ongoing consequences for the kingdom's strategic interests and international relationships. Your Royal Highness, we must consider the possibility that Leopold's activities have been used to serve multiple operational objectives simultaneously, Director Mitchell explained, showing charts and timelines that demonstrated correlations between Leopold's communications and significant political and economic events. His information may have been used to influence election outcomes in allied countries, manipulate currency markets, and coordinate terrorist activities in ways that create deniability for the ultimate beneficiaries while maximizing damage to our strategic interests. The meeting continued for 4 hours, during which Isabella was forced to confront the reality that her beloved nephew had become, whether willingly or through manipulation, a significant threat to everything her family had spent generations building and protecting. The evidence indicated that Leopold's activities had already caused substantial damage and would continue to pose serious risks until decisive action was taken to neutralize the threat he represented. Colonel Reynolds concluded the briefing with recommendations that Isabella knew would shatter any remaining hope for resolving the situation through private family intervention. Your Royal Highness, our assessment is that Prince Leopold's compromise is so extensive and his operational value to hostile interests so significant that standard security measures will be insufficient to contain the threat. We recommend immediate implementation of containment protocols that will effectively isolate Leopold from all opportunities to continue his current activities while we develop strategies for longer-term resolution. The containment protocols that Colonel Reynolds described would effectively end Leopold's life as a member of the royal family, placing him under constant surveillance in secured facilities while experts attempted to determine the full extent of his compromise and develop methods for reversing or neutralizing his conditioning. The process would be presented to the public as treatment for undisclosed health issues, but Leopold would understand that his freedom, his relationships, and his future as a royal had been permanently altered. Isabella left the meeting with the terrible knowledge that she would need to recommend to her father that Leopold be subjected to containment protocols that would save the monarchy, but destroy the boy she had loved and protected since his birth. The evidence was overwhelming, the threats were real, and the consequences of inaction were unacceptable, but the personal cost of the necessary actions would haunt her for the rest of her life. That evening, as Isabella prepared for what might be her final conversation with Leopold as his loving aunt rather than his institutional adversary, she stood once again at her window, watching the gardens where Leopold played with the innocent joy of childhood, unaware that his world was about to collapse around him in ways that would define the rest of his existence. The following morning brought unseasonably cold rain that drummed against the palace windows with persistent intensity, as if nature itself were reflecting the storm about to break over the royal family. Isabella had spent the sleepless night preparing for the most difficult conversation of her life, knowing that her next words to Leopold would either begin his salvation or confirm his destruction. King Frederick had accepted her recommendations regarding containment protocols, but had insisted that Leopold be given one opportunity to voluntarily cooperate with the investigation before more drastic measures were implemented. Isabella found Leopold in the palace library, seated in a leather chair beneath the portrait of King William III, completely absorbed in reading what appeared to be an advanced text on international law. The scene perfectly captured the contradiction that had made the investigation so heartbreaking. Here was a brilliant, curious child engaged in intellectual pursuits that demonstrated his potential for greatness. Yet those same capabilities had been corrupted and weaponized against his own family. Leopold, I need to speak with you about some serious matters that affect our entire family, Isabella said gently, settling into the chair opposite him, and noting how his body language immediately shifted from relaxed openness to careful attention. I hope you'll be honest with me, because the decisions we make in the next few minutes will determine your future and the future of everyone you care about. Leopold closed his book with deliberate precision and looked directly at his aunt with eyes that seemed far older than his 12 years. Aunt Isabella, I've been expecting this conversation for several weeks now, he said quietly, his voice carrying a composure that confirmed every suspicion about his advanced development and awareness. I know about Captain Thornfield's investigation. I know about the meetings you've been having, and I know that you've discovered at least part of what I've been doing. The calm acceptance in Leopold's voice eliminated any remaining hope Isabella might have harbored that the situation could be resolved through simple explanation or gentle correction. His immediate acknowledgement of the investigation's existence and his apparent preparation for this confrontation confirmed that he had been operating with full awareness of the risks and consequences of his actions. Leopold, I need you to help me understand how this situation developed and whether you realize the serious implications of your activities, Isabella continued, maintaining the gentle tone that had always characterized their relationship despite the fundamental change in their circumstances. The information we've gathered suggests that you've been sharing sensitive family and government information with people whose intentions may not align with your own understanding of right and wrong. Leopold's response revealed the sophisticated thinking that had made him such an effective intelligence asset, while simultaneously demonstrating the psychological manipulation that had corrupted his moral reasoning. Aunt Isabella, I understand that my activities appear to be betraying family trust, but I've been helping people who are working to prevent much greater injustices and tragedies than anything my information sharing might cause. The people I've been working with have shown me evidence of corruption, abuse of power, and harmful policies that our family supports without understanding their real consequences. The explanation confirmed Dr. Harper's assessment that Leopold had been psychologically conditioned to believe his betrayal served higher moral purposes. His handlers had skillfully exploited his intelligence, idealism, and natural sense of justice to convince him that working against his family's interests actually represented moral courage and social responsibility. Isabella felt her heart breaking as she realized that Leopold's betrayal stemmed not from malice or greed, but from sophisticated manipulation that had corrupted his understanding of truth and loyalty while appealing to his genuine desire to make a positive difference in the world. The boy she was speaking with was simultaneously the nephew she loved and a carefully crafted weapon designed to destroy everything she had spent her life protecting. Leopold, the people who have been working with you have not been honest about their true intentions or the real consequences of the information you've provided, Isabella said, knowing that his psychological conditioning would make it difficult for him to accept evidence that contradicted his handler's explanations. We have proof that your information has been used to harm innocent people, manipulate financial markets, and compromise the security of our allies in ways that have nothing to do with preventing injustice or protecting vulnerable populations. Leopold's reaction to Isabella's revelations demonstrated the depth of his psychological conditioning and the challenge that rehabilitation would represent. Rather than showing surprise or concern, he responded with arguments that had clearly been prepared in advance, suggesting that his handlers had anticipated this confrontation and provided him with explanations designed to maintain his cooperation even after discovery. Aunt Isabella, I know you believe you're protecting the family and the country, but you're seeing only part of a much larger picture, Leopold said with conviction that was both admirable and heartbreaking. The people I work with have shown me evidence that our family's policies and decisions have consequences that we don't hear about in our normal briefings. They've helped me understand that sometimes protecting people requires actions that appear to be betraying smaller loyalties in service of larger truths. The conversation continued for nearly an hour, during which Isabella gradually realized that Leopold's compromise was even more extensive than the intelligence assessment had indicated. His handlers had not only recruited him as an information source, but had systematically restructured his moral and ethical framework in ways that made him genuinely believe that betraying his family served higher principles of justice and social responsibility. As their conversation neared its conclusion, Isabella faced the terrible moment when she would need to inform Leopold that his choices had made it impossible for him to continue his life as a member of the royal family. The containment protocols would be implemented within hours, and Leopold's future would be determined by security professionals rather than by family love and forgiveness. Leopold, because of the serious nature of your activities and the ongoing threat they represent, decisions have been made that will change your life in fundamental ways, Isabella said, her voice carrying the formal tone required by the gravity of the situation despite her personal anguish. You will be placed in a secure facility where experts will work with you to address the psychological conditioning you've experienced and to ensure that you cannot continue activities that threaten family and national security. Leopold's response to the news of his impending containment revealed both the sophistication of his preparation and the genuine humanity that his handlers had been careful not to destroy entirely. Aunt Isabella, I understand that you believe this is necessary, and I don't hate you for making this decision, he said quietly, his composure finally showing cracks that revealed the frightened child beneath the carefully constructed operational persona. But I want you to know that I genuinely believed I was doing the right thing, and I still believe that the people I was helping were trying to make the world better. The final moments of their conversation were interrupted by the arrival of Captain Thornfield and a team of security specialists who would implement the containment protocols that would separate Leopold from his family indefinitely. As Leopold was escorted from the library, he turned back to Isabella with an expression that combined love, forgiveness, and profound sadness. I hope someday you'll understand that I was trying to be worthy of the trust you placed in me, even if I chose the wrong way to honor that trust, Leopold said, his words carrying a maturity that made Isabella's heart ache with loss and regret. Hours later, Isabella stood once again at her window, looking out at gardens where Leopold would no longer play, knowing that protocol had indeed been shattered, but not in the way anyone could have anticipated. The investigation had revealed that the greatest threat to the royal family had come not from external enemies, but from the corruption of love and loyalty through sophisticated psychological manipulation that had turned their brightest star into their most dangerous adversary. The containment of Leopold would be announced to the public as treatment for undisclosed health issues, but Isabella knew that the real treatment would involve years of psychological rehabilitation that might or might not succeed in reversing the damage that had been done to a brilliant child whose greatest crime had been believing that betraying his family could serve the cause of justice. The protocol that had been shattered was not just institutional procedure, but the fundamental trust upon which all family relationships depend, and Isabella feared that neither Leopold nor the monarchy would ever fully recover from the devastation that love corrupted by manipulation had wrought.